This is the Puglia of sun-soaked seas, beaches and villages, with untouched nature, shrines, coastal landscapes and inland beauty. A journey to discover its traditional recipes and the castles, art and history of its cities, treading the paths of past and present. The Adriatic coast is a land of arrivals and departures. Molfetta, north of Bari, has many stories to tell about the sea and fishing traditions. Molfetta's fish market is a flourishing centre for a vast area of Puglia. The teeming seas have played a crucial role in the town's history. Skate, mullet, hake, anchovies, squid, prawns and octopus fill the stalls. Every day the fish market is alive with the fishmongers' cries and the delicious aromas of the fresh catch. It's also a destination for trawlers from Brindisi, Vasto and Termoli. The oldest part of Molfetta lies on a projecting finger of land. A Baroque church was built in the 1600s. A century later, this became the city's cathedral. The old cathedral, founded in medieval times on the seashore, was no longer the center of the city's religious life, so it retained its original Romanesque appearance. Medieval buildings lined the old town's intricate network of narrow streets. Life seems to pass slowly. But at early dawn, the fish market fills with lively haggling. The buyers are shopkeepers, street vendors and wholesalers. Every day they shout out their bids at auction. But the modern age is arriving, and these deals will be recorded on a remotely managed computer network. A click of the mouse will replace the shouts and gestures of timeless tradition. Inland, the limestone rock provides some surprising landscapes. In many places, water erosion has caused the land to collapse, forming deep depressions cloaked in vegetation. The largest bowl is the Pulo di Altamura, 90 meters deep and 500 across. The many caves in the walls of Pulo were Neolithic shelters. The area lies at the southern tip of the Murge Plateau, which occupies the area inland from Bari to Basilicata. Here, mankind has long struggled against a bleak, dry terrain, and the lunar landscape is dotted with karst outcrops, caves, and rare streams. Only the occasional dwelling interrupts the broad vista of fields and meadows. The olive oil and bread of the Murgia has a simple, authentic taste. The most famous bread is made in the Altamura ovens, the first bakery product in Italy to gain protected origin status. This is the Santa Chiara oven, dedicated to Santa Chiara. Here we're opposite the convent of Santa Chiara. This oven dates from the 1400s. Altamura bread was the staple food for peasants and shepherds who spent long periods away from home. We have a bread that gets better 10 days after baking. We have the platted bread. That's the most traditional. We also make usquaneta, a loaf that weighs more than a kilo. It can weigh from 2 to 10 kilos. And then there's the so-called priest's cap, tarallo bread. A huge choice of loaves, so everyone can choose the kind of bread they like. And buon appetito to everybody. Altamura's historic centre dates back to the 13th century, when Frederick II built the cathedral, castle, and city walls. With its wheat fields and hillsides parched by the sun, the Alta Murgia shows nature in the wild. This area is protected by a national park covering 70,000 hectares of steppe-like, semi-arid land. It's the home of wild orchids and birds of prey like kestrels. The Murgia landscape is slashed by so-called gravine, deep clefts caused by erosion of the limestone rock along the streams. Gravina is also the name of the town perched on the edge of one of these gorges. The cathedral stands close by. It was built by the Normans, then modified in the Renaissance and Baroque period. Nearby is the 17th century Chiesa del Purgatorio, its tympanum decorated with skeletons. On the walls of the region's oldest library, the mechanical clock depicts Garibaldi and King Vittorio Emanuele II. The churches and buildings of Gravina's historic centre are not the only custodians of the past. Local traditions are kept alive by craftsmen's hands. The workshops still produce one of the city's symbols. The terracotta whistles that enliven homes and festivals were originally used to help shepherds gather their flocks. This is a typical whistle. There's a hole here. The note changes when you move your finger. This one, though, has no hole. It's just a whistle, one note, and that's it. But with this hole, we can make two kinds of sound like a cuckoo. But the whistle just sounds like, well, a whistle. There are different sizes too. The pitch changes according to how big it is. Gravina has close links with its whistles, symbols of fertility and a way of mocking rulers during festivals. Thank goodness we still carry on with this activity. Sometimes we've neglected it for short periods. We went into the countryside. We went to Germany. The market for them is still flourishing, with whistles of all shapes and sizes. The craftsmen handle every detail, from raw clay to decoration.
Dalla A alla Z.
From A to Z. The great eagle on the coat of arms dominating the facade of the Madonna delle Grazie seems to watch Gravina's stone houses from afar. Since prehistoric times, mankind has sheltered in the holes in the rock. In the Middle Ages, an entire civilization developed, with communities living in a maze of caverns and tunnels. The church of San Michele, with its fragments of Byzantine art, is one of the ancient shrines protected by these stone walls. From the Gravina caves, our journey continues through the landscapes of the Valle d'Itria, studded with trulli. These typical dwellings have a conical stone roof. They have ancient origins and are built to remain warm in winter and cool in summer. Their dry stone structure even makes them resistant to earthquakes. Alberobello has over 1,000 trulli. UNESCO has recognized the unique nature of its historic center, a status reserved for such cultural centers as Florence, Vienna or Prague. Alberobello still retains its atmosphere of tradition, with the grey stone and dazzling white sunlight. A few kilometers from Alberobello, the white walls of the houses still gleam in the sun. The peaceful streets of Loco Rotondo are arranged in a circle around the mother church. Its bulk looms over the town centre, with Baroque and neoclassical designs. From the hilltop, the viewer's gaze takes in the scenery of the Valle d'Itria. For centuries, its land has been devoted to wine production.
Loco Rotondo enjoys an age-old tradition. Most of our wine producers have worked like this in the Valle d'Itria area. All the people who have chosen to invest in this kind of production are steered towards supporting the minor varieties too. Fiano is one of these, a very special variety that has disappeared over recent years. And the estates are trying to invest above all in this type of vine.
But success doesn't come easy.
You have to look after them from planting to maturity. It's a full-time job, caring for the vines every day, as if they're about to give birth.
Local farming traditions exist alongside an important historical artifact. The Sepannibale temple is over 1,000 years old. Its structure retains signs of the Lombard presence in the area. Two monolithic pillars divide the space into 3 naves. The chapel used to be covered in frescoes. The surviving work is one of the oldest examples of high medieval painting. It's not just the meadow that the horses, showing off their Arab blood, share with the church. The temple domes, in fact, reveal the first cultural influence of Sicilian Arabs. A large part of the surrounding countryside is dotted with masserie, typical Puglian farms. The first buildings were simple dwellings for the people who worked the land. In medieval times, those nearest the sea became fortresses to ward off Ottoman raids. They later became manor houses or elegant hotels. The village of Cisternino was also a target during the constant incursions. Eastern influence can be felt in the narrow streets of the historic centre, now turned into an even more charming tourist magnet. Puglia's characteristic geography makes it a paradise for potholers. The thousands of ravines carved out of the rock are a legacy of a remote past that's also left prehistoric remains. The most famous caves are those of Castellana, with their stalactites and stalagmites creating an underground play of shape and color along 3 kilometers of galleries. Further north, towards Bari, Marchio Castle is another example of how places can change over the years. In the year 1000, it became the seat of the noble Acquaviva family. It was surrounded by over 1,000 hectares of wood and Mediterranean scrub, set aside for hunting. In the 1930s, its decorative heritage was given new life. Now, its rooms host receptions and banquets held in an almost fairy tale atmosphere. Being a guest in one of Puglia's many farmhouses means immersing yourself in the farming culture and the region's traditional flavors. The charms of this most elegant accommodation embody the region's character. The quality of the welcome expresses the best the soil can produce. What we use in this hotel is practically all our own produce, from the farm, of course. Not far from the sea, among groves of olive, almond and carob, farmhouse dishes are inspired by traditional cooking.
Tiella is the typical Puglian dish. It's based on vegetables and mussels. It's a meal in itself that can be prepared beforehand, so that when you came back from the fields, it would be ready.
Guests in a farmhouse like this can often wander down to a beautiful beach. Such a stay is halfway between country and seaside living. Typical Puglian prehistoric cave settlements can also be seen around Polignano a Mare. The village boasts ancient origins going back to Greek colonization. The houses of the historic centre are built on the cliffs, and during storms the crashing waves almost break over their roofs. Behind the houses, sheer above the sea, winds a maze of narrow streets with whitewashed courtyards and buildings. Traditional and modern live side by side in Puglia's capital. Ancient Bari was founded on a peninsula. South of the medieval centre, the avenues are lined with early 19th century buildings. Bari is now southern Italy's largest city, with over 300,000 inhabitants. The city's continuing growth can be seen in its most recent architecture. The stadium, named after its patron saint Nicholas, is by Renzo Piano. Bari has been an important political, economic and cultural centre since Roman times. In the Middle Ages, it became a place of pilgrimage. The cathedral, dedicated to Saint Sabino, is a fine example of Puglian Romanesque. The church was built in the 13th century near the famous San Nicola Cathedral. Baroque embellishments were added to the simple facade. Renovation work in the 1960s restored the original Romanesque elements to how they must have looked before the 18th century modifications. In high medieval times, Bari formed part of the Byzantine Empire. In the late 10th century, it became the seat of the Catapano, the imperial functionary who governed southern Italy. This political role also encouraged its economic growth. After Norman domination, in the 13th century, sovereignty passed to the German Swevia dynasty. Emperor Frederick II built the castle to strengthen its defences and his imperial power. But the city had already gained fame through an 11th century event.
Nel 1087 la città di Bari.
In 1087, the city of Bari needed to solve a dramatic dilemma. It had been the capital of southern Italy from 968 to 1071, but had lost this role after the Norman conquest. So the city's merchants and middle classes decided to solve the problem by creating a powerful symbol, the cathedral. They'd already arranged it. They had stolen the bones of San Nicola and brought them here to Bari on the afternoon of the 9th of May. The city folk immediately began to build a shrine to hold the saint's bones. Around a century later, the Cathedral of San Nicola was consecrated. The remains attracted hordes of pilgrims and enhanced the city's prestige. So he has two faces: San Nicola of the lay people, the stolen saint of the people, not the church. So he became part of the fabric of the city. Even Bari's most committed atheists have a picture of San Nicola, because San Nicola isn't so much an ecclesiastical saint as the symbol of the city. The news spread across Europe, and the saint's feast day in December became a children's festival. His Latin name, Sanctus Nicolaus, was transformed into Santa Claus, and children all over the world call him Father Christmas. It's said that St. Nicholas is the hero of many miracles and incredible cures, beliefs shared by the Latin West and the Greek and Slavic East.
Quindi San Nicola già dall'inizio.
Right from the beginning, San Nicola was an ecumenical phenomenon. And this is proof of the fact that the split between Roman and Orthodox Catholics was based on canonic law. And indeed, since 1966, we Dominicans have set aside a chapel in the crypt, in the corner on the left, where Orthodox Catholics can say Mass every Sunday. Now, 1,000 years later, the city's name is still indissolubly linked to that of St. Nicholas. Bari remains a cultural crossroads between East and West, and a meeting place for past and future. Because ancient markets and traditional festivals haven't impeded entrepreneurial progress. Its two facets have always coexisted: the maritime city of fishermen and sailors, and the city of the soil. Like its capital, the entire region unfolds in a series of diverse locations, from sheer sea cliffs to inland heights and plains, all encapsulating Puglia's timeless charm.